Now let's get Google Sign In working so that when users click on our Sign In with Google button, they'll be given a pop-up that will enable them to provide their Google email or phone number as well as their password. And as a result, we can get their user data, authenticate them, and show them the authenticated screen. To do this, we're going to need to use the Google Sign In package located in your dependencies in pubspec.yaml. We'll bring that into home.dart up at the top, and instead of having to import it manually, we'll just execute a method called Google Sign In, and you might get a suggestion to auto import it. You can just hit tab in that case. So now we've brought in Google Sign In the package, and when we execute this function, we can create a reference which we'll put in a variable, a final variable called Google Sign In, and this will enable us to use a number of methods that will allow users to log in and log out, etc. And this is going to have the type Google Sign In. So now that we have this reference, we can head down to our gesture detector, and instead of just printing some value, we'll instead execute a function. So we'll provide a reference here to a function called login, which we'll create above our build function. We'll actually put it above both of our functions that return widgets. And to log in users is very simple. We just need to take Google Sign In and on it call a method sign in, and that's it. So this function is going to be necessary to actually open that modal, that screen that I mentioned. However, when a user is actually authenticated, nothing's going to happen in our app. We're not going to be able to collect their data, and we're not going to know when to update isAuth from false to true. Fortunately, Google Sign In has given to us an active listener, a listener that we can set up in order to check to see if a user's signed in with Firebase using Google Sign In. So this listener is to be set up within our init state function. When we initialize this state, we want to set it up. So we'll add our init state method, and here we can take Google Sign In dot on current user change, that's the name of the listener, dot listen. And when a user is signed in successfully using the sign in method, we'll get back our data using the callback that's available within listen. So we'll add an anonymous function to that, where we'll get within the parameters an account that's of type Google Sign In account. So the account data that we get is either going to resolve to some user data of type Google Sign In account or null. So we can add a conditional here and say if account is not equal to null, if we actually have some user data, then we can print account, print that data, and we can update our state. So we can use set state to update isAuth to be true. Otherwise, we want to set it to false, make sure it's still false. So let's test this out, and I'm just going to add the text account or user signed in to the print line, and then I'll interpolate account by adding a $sign before the actual value. So let's save home.dart and test this out. We'll click on sign in with Google. You may need to do a hot restart. And just as a quick aside, if you're getting the following error or platform exception saying your app is missing support for the following URL schemes, that means that you haven't provided the reversed client URL that's within your Google service info.plist file, the reversed client ID, I should say. You haven't provided that string to your info.plist file that's within your runner folder in iOS. So you'll just need to provide that, and once you update this file and save, you should be good to rerun your application in whatever way you did previously. Also, if your debug session suddenly crashes, that's usually the result of this error. So once we hot restart and attempt to sign in, we should see a little pop-up that says that Fluttershare wants to use google.com to sign in. We'll hit continue, and we should get our page that I mentioned asking users to provide their email or phone. And we see here, sign in to continue to Fluttershare. And since we provided that as the app name when we enabled Google Sign In as our provider in Firebase, that's where this app title is coming from. So once you provide an email and password, we're automatically taken to the authenticated page when our onCurrent user changed listener fires. And if we check out our debug console, we see user signed in with a map of type Google Sign-In account containing a bunch of user information: display name, the name associated with our Google account, the email associated with it, a unique ID, as well as a photo URL, the URL that we have associated with our account. So this is great. However, when we hot restart our app to simulate when a user opens their app, a user opening their app, we see if we head back to our simulator, our session is gone. We're taken back to our unauth screen. So this helps to reveal the nature of our listener. It listens for when there are any changes to our current user, but it's not preserving our session. So how do we re-authenticate our user when our app is opened once again? Obviously, our user just signed in and we want to restore the session. We don't want it to go away whenever a user opens the app again. So the solution is to execute a different function when init state is fired, when our home state is created. And by the way, one good measure to take for this listen function, I should say after this listen function, is to add a comma and then the on-error argument. On-error is a callback which detects any errors in listening for a change in the auth state or the user state, and we can provide to the parameters of this on-error function one called error. This is going to contain information about any errors. So if that's the case, we'll just print error signing in and then interpolate that error with its message. So I'll just add a comment above our listener and say this detects when user signed in or signed out, as we'll soon see. And we're going to add another function that will re-authenticate user when app is opened or reopened. So again, we're going to get it from Google Sign In, and this is going to be called Sign In Silently. And to sign in silently, there is a parameter or an argument called suppress errors. We want to set that to false because just like with our listener, we want to catch any errors. The difference with sign in silently is that since it returns a promise, we need to, in order to resolve what comes back from executing it, from signing in, we need to add a then statement. So we need to resolve the future, and we see if we hover over the function, the returned future, when we resolve it, resolves to an instance of Google Sign In account for a successful sign in or null, just like our on current user changed listener. So to then, which accepts a function, again we're going to get our account, and we're going to apply the same logic. We're going to set state and make isAuth true if we have our account, and we're going to say isAuth is false if not. So instead of duplicating this and pasting it in again right here in our then function, we'll extract this to a separate function which we'll just call handle sign in, which will accept an account of type Google Sign In account, and here is where we'll set state, and we can now remove all of this within the function we passed to listen and just call handle sign in and pass in account to it, and do the same for the function in the then for sign in silently. And then for sign in silently to catch any errors, we can chain on the function catch error, which is also going to give us an error map, and we can print the same value with the line that we used for our listener. So now when we save home.dart, we go back to our simulator. We may need to hot restart once again But as you can see, when our app runs, it signs us in the background with our sign in silently function, and we're taken back to our authenticated screen. Now that we've allowed users to sign in and sign up to our app, let's add the last bit of functionality for our authentication flow, and that is to enable users to sign out or log out. So just like logging in or signing in, that's very easy. We'll create a separate function called logout, and to do that we can just say Google signin dot sign out, and we want to display this in our auth screen, so we can replace the text authenticated with just a simple button. We'll use a raised button where the child is going to be the text log out, where we'll set on pressed to reference our new logout function. So we'll save home, we'll do another hot restart. So we'll be taken to our auth screen, which is now just a button, and when we click on it, we're immediately taken back to our unauth screen. So we see that the onCurrent user changed listener not only signs us in automatically, detects when a user signs up to our app or signs in, but also when they sign out by executing this sign out method. Since recording this course, there's been some changes to doing Google sign in with Firebase apps. You might be getting this error upon trying to sign in. Error 403, restricted client. This app is not yet configured to make OAuth requests. To do that, set up the app's OAuth consent screen in the Google Cloud Console. Before finishing Google sign in, we need to create this consent screen. Basically, the screen, the modal that's going to show up whenever a user tries to sign in with Google. So to configure that, we just need to tap on the link Learn More, and we'll be taken to this console developers Google site, and this project was created for us behind the scenes when we created our Firebase app. And what we need to provide here to this OAuth consent screen tab is we need to provide an application name. In our case, that will be Flutter Share. An application logo. If you don't have a logo, feel free to just use a familiar image on your computer. And we need to set up a support email shown on the consent screen for user support. And when that's done, we can hit save. And now our consent screen is set up. And now our users can sign in successfully with Google, and we won't get any errors during that process.